Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special episode of the Built on Purpose podcast, where each episode I interview exceptional leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, philosophers, and straight-up interesting people to explore their outlook on life, work, and leadership. My hope for our listeners is that you can take away a special nugget of information from each of these interviews, something that will serve you and the people most important to you in pursuing a life built on purpose. My name is Brian Moore, co-founder and managing partner of Y Scouts, and today I'm interviewing Raj Sisodia, co-author of many books, including Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business, and Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose. Raj is a very dear friend of mine, someone I met many years ago when attending a Conscious Capitalism event. Since that time, Raj's work and the work of his colleagues has become, well, let's just say the gospel for our team here at Y Scouts. The future that Raj envisions, talks about, and writes about so eloquently is a future we should all aspire towards. Having the opportunity to spend time with Raj, both during this interview and outside of it, has been a real gift, to say the least. I hope you are ready for an amazing podcast interview with someone who's had a tremendous impact on my life. I bring you Raj Sisodia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Raj Sisodia. Raj, wonderful to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm very happy to be with you.
So, there's probably a few folks who might have been living under a rock over the last decade or so who don't know who you are. And you've had a really interesting journey. And in some of the research and having known you now for a little while, I think it would be awesome to start with if you could share just a little bit about your journey with perhaps some focus around having grown up in India, studying as an electrical engineer, to what has now led you into this conscious business pursuit, which in some ways I'm sure has some connectivity to electrical engineering, but in many ways I think to most of us is quite a bit different. Maybe you can start there for us.
Well, I do get a charge out of it, so there's that connection. It's funny how life evolves. Somebody had told me the direction things would have taken. I would have never believed it, although I would have loved it, because it's certainly what I do now resonates strongly with who I was as a child. I was kind of this idealistic kid, wanted to get along with everybody, wanted the world to be a certain way, peaceful. Why do we have to have all this conflict? Why can't we have a world that's built upon these kinds of values? And was always told that that's impractical, that the world is a rough and tough place, and, you cannot survive like this. You have to forget all of that stuff and, compromise on all those things that are kind of inherent to who you are. And so I suppressed a lot of that. And I grew up mostly in India until the age 7, actually. Then we did live abroad for 5 years. My father was a plant scientist, got his PhD in Canada. And he left us when I was quite little, and came back to India by the time I was 7. And then we moved to Barbados for a couple of years. He was working on sugarcane research in California. He was working on wheat research in Canada, and then back to India right around 1970. So I grew up from the age of 12 until high school and college and grad school in India. And so I had kind of this blend of East and West perspectives, and then came back to this country for my PhD. I ended up getting an engineering degree because, in India in the 1970s was kind of a semi-socialist state with nothing much happening. The economy was dead, barely growing at all. Most major sectors were nationalized. The marginal tax rate the year I graduated high school was 97.5%.
Wow.
If you can believe it.
Wow. So 97.5 cents of every dollar was taken in taxes.
Beyond, above a certain threshold, right? So obviously everybody didn't pay that, but if you had, a high income above a certain level, that was the highest marginal tax rate.
Wow.
Right? But you can just imagine what kind of an impact that has.
Sure.
And of course, everything was controlled and regulated and licensed, and only 2 car companies in the country and 2 companies that made scooters, and you had like a 5 to 10 year waiting list if you wanted to buy those products, and quality wasn't good. There was a thriving black market and everything. It's because of government control. So all of this planted seeds in me of strong, and also having lived in the U.S. and other places, just a strong bias against government ownership and control of these kinds of things, and recognizing what it does, perhaps with good intentions, but it doesn't work, right? And nationalizing the banks and nationalizing the airline and the government in the business of making bread and providing milk and everything they touched is turned to ashes. It was terrible. So in those days, in that environment, your options were strictly limited. Coming out of high school, if you showed any aptitude for math and science, you tried to get into one of the few good engineering. There's a handful of sort of elite engineering schools in India. And if you were good in science and biology, then you tried to be a doctor. And if you weren't good in either of those things, then God help you. And maybe you get into a government service. You get into the Indian Administrative Service and become a collector or whatever they were called, with lots of power, very little money, lots of corruption. And so those were kind of your paths. So even though I didn't have any real passion for engineering per se. Somebody had really asked me, what would you really want to do? Maybe be a journalist or something. But that really wasn't an option. So I ended up going to engineering school because I got into one of those good schools and spent 5 long years becoming an electronics engineer. Again, I enjoyed certain aspects of it, but for the most part, it really wasn't who I was. And so I ended up working as an engineer for some total of 29 days. Pretty good trade-off, 5 years of hard labor for 29 days of working. And I found out, and I was really quite, in those days there was no internet. I was in this little college town in the middle of the desert somewhere in India. Didn't know much about the world, and found out that there's something called business school, and that if you go to business school, your salary would double from what you got as an engineer, and probably work in an air-conditioned office. So that sounds pretty good to me. Because I was working in an electrical switchgear factory in hot and humid Bombay, and it was a tough grind. Those 29 days, I don't know how I survived them. So then, just like with engineering, there's a handful of business schools in India in those days, and the competition is fierce. They take the one I went to, they had 45 seats and 7,000 applicants. And fortunately, I was able to get into that. So I happily resigned my engineering job and went off to business school. And again, I knew nothing about business, really. I soon discovered I didn't like finance, so I chose marketing. And those were the two choices. There was also human resources. Again, that was kind of the third wheel. And so I got a MBA in marketing. And I had a job lined up in a strategy firm in India. And then one day I come down to breakfast and I see a bunch of my friends dressed up on a Saturday, I think it was, a day we didn't have classes. And I was in my pajamas, I think, still. This was in the graduate dorm. And I said, where are you guys going on a holiday? We don't have classes. So we're going to the U.S. Information Agency to pick up GMAT applications. I said, we're already doing our MBA. Why do you need to take the GMAT? I said, we want to apply for a PhD in business in the U.S. I said, I didn't know you can do a PhD in business. I said, give me 5 minutes, I'll change and I'll come with you there. Right? Because, in those days, like I said, the economy was there, and if you had an opportunity to get to the U.S., you took it, right? And I thought I didn't have that. I thought there were no options available to do that, having gotten an MBA in India. So long story short, I went with those guys. There were 10 of us. And the irony is that I'm the only person out of that group of 10 that ends up coming to the U.S. to get a PhD.
Wow.
So had I not come down that morning, who knows what trajectory life would have taken.
Interesting.
But so I came to Columbia and I started a PhD. But again, as you can see, none of this was driven by a master plan or a real passion for anything. It was just kind of the next opportunistic thing.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Yeah.
And maybe that's the world we were in those days, although I'm sure there were friends of mine who did have a sense of mission and purpose in their life, but I really didn't discover any of that. So I got a PhD in marketing and I started teaching. I went to Columbia University and I started teaching at Boston University. And I liked some aspects of it, but still I didn't consider it my life's purpose, It was just a job. And soon enough, I started to find aspects of it that actually I did not like. I felt that marketing was very inauthentic in many ways, that there was a huge amount of waste and inefficiency and ineffectiveness, just the sheer amount of money that we spend on marketing in this country. And what we do with it, what we say, how it's used, there's also a lot of unethical practices. We routinely overpromise, underdeliver, you know. I mean, it's on the borderline of really lying about what we're offering, right? It's like hucksterism, a lot of it. And so my focus, I started to do work on marketing ethics and also on marketing productivity, efficiency and effectiveness. And so that became the bulk of my research focus for quite a while. How can we improve marketing practice, or at least not waste as much money? Because everybody else was spending less and doing more. If you look at manufacturing, or even if you look at management, companies are becoming more efficient and effective over time.
Yep.
But in marketing, we were spending more and more, and yet customer loyalty, customer satisfaction had plateaued, customer loyalty had fallen deeply, and customer trust had plummeted, coincident with the rise of marketing spending. I said, there's something wrong here. The more we spend on marketing, the less trust and loyalty there is from customers. People are just willing to buy whatever is on sale, basically, right? Wherever there's a deal. There's no real connection there. So I started a series of projects around that, and then we did a study on the image of marketing, because my own father, he would say, my son is a professor of marketing, and he would put inverted quotes around marketing. He was quite amused. He said, I got a PhD in genetics, and you're getting a PhD in, what is this, ads and coupons? So, I mean, there was a sense of like, is this really a socially worthwhile
pursuit?
Is the world a better place?
Yeah.
Is the world a better place because we spend $1 trillion a year in this country on marketing in those days, 2007 when we did it, right? And if you do the math on that, so that's $3,300 per person in those days. So about $14,000 a family, okay, is being spent on your behalf on ads, coupons, all that stuff.
Yeah.
If you look at it another way, it was the GDP of India, equal to the GDP of India. 1 billion people were living on what we were spending here on ads and coupons.
Wow.
Okay, for
Wow.
300 million people.
Wow, that puts it into perspective.
Look at it another way. Another way to look at it, that it was more on a per capita basis than the income of 85% of the world's people.
Wow.
Right? So 85% of people in the world are living on less than what we're spending here on ads and coupons. I said, wow, that's a lot. So what are we getting? What are customers getting out of all of this? What are companies getting out of all of this? And what is society getting out of all of this? Because ideally, you should have a positive answer on each of those. And as I did my research further on that, I found, most customers, we did a study on the image of marketing, 85% of people have a negative view of marketing. If it comes from marketing, it can't be true, right? It's not real, it's just marketing. Maybe we've all heard those phrases, right? Companies, if you look at the return on investment, etc., if you look at response rates on coupons and recall rates on advertisements and all those things, even email marketing over time, everything is inefficient and ineffective, right? And if you look at the impact on society, what has happened to our popular culture? One thing $1 trillion a year does buy is a huge impact on the culture. So what is it doing to the psyches of people, especially young people, especially young women? A friend of mine has made a bunch of documentaries. Her name is Jean Kilbourne, called Killing Us Softly, which is about the impact of how women are depicted in advertising and what that has done to the psyche of young women, right? And how that has contributed to eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorders and depression and all kinds of things.
Yeah, that shows up. It shows up, not to cut you off, it shows up, I'm a father of 2 young daughters, and I see the way they emulate what they see, what they read, whether it's in a magazine or on their iPads. And it truly does have an impact.
Right, but marketing or marketers don't hold themselves accountable for that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, do whatever we have to do to sell more product.
Yeah.
Whether it's marketing to children or, all of that. So it just felt to me like it's a toxic brew of stuff, and, there has to be a better way.
Yeah.
And I read this phrase that Peter Drucker had used. By the way, we did a conference and then a book called Does Marketing Need Reform? Do we need to fundamentally reinvent this field of marketing? right? Because the more we spend, the worse it's getting. Nobody trusts us. We have no, within the company, outside the company, with customers, etc. This profession seemed to us to be in a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read this phrase that Peter Drucker said, the rise of the consumer movement in America is the shame of marketing. Why should consumers have to organize themselves against a company if marketing is doing what we teach, which is to represent the well-being and the interests of customers, right? Marketing is supposed to represent and do and align what the company does with what's good for customers, and thereby earn their custom, But that's not the reality, right? So he said this is the shame of marketing. So I actually started a book called The Shame of Marketing. Okay.
I'm sure you were the most popular professor in your group.
Marketing professor. I know. I don't think I told my colleagues. And somebody said, "Oh, that's just way too over the top." So then I called it marketing malpractices. So it was basically going to be about all my research that I had done on inefficiency, ineffectiveness, unethical. How can we, and a little bit about what do we do about it. But for the most part, making the case in a book-length form about how everything wasn't working in marketing. And you can imagine that that's a lot of negative energy, right? I mean, it was all. I also started a book called Drugs Are Us, which was about marketing in pharmaceuticals. Because that's, if you look at where's the worst example of all of this, it's in the drug industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Companies are spending. They're some of the biggest spenders now with direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription drugs. And you've seen all of those things. And if you watch the evening news, by the end of it, you will be convinced that you've got 6 new diseases every day, right? And you have to take all these pills, and each one of them could kill you in 16 ways, right?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. All these quote-unquote side effects seem to be minimized, and at the end of the day, these are real effects, not side effects.
Right. So, I mean, there's horrible and unethical practices in that industry, and every leading company has paid like multi-$100 million, if not multi-billion-dollar fines for unethical, misleading advertising, which borders on the criminal. Because when people are dying because you're choosing to market aggressively a drug for a condition for which it was not approved, right, and you're downplaying the side effects and so forth, and you're paying doctors to publish fake research, all of this is a common practice. So anyway, and I had a special needs son who was on many of these meds and suffering the side effects, So it was a little personal. So anyway, this is where I was around 2004, 2005, mired in this sort of self-hatred of what am I doing, and how am I contributing to all this negative things in society. And then I got, I think, the most significant piece of advice I've had in my life. And my mentor and co-author, Jag Sheth, who's a professor at Emory, one of the most eminent marketing scholars in the world, he told me, Raj, in this country, people want to hear about the solution. People don't want to hear about the problem. Right? And you've been very focused on the problem. Do we have a solution for this? Right? And that was a simple question, but a huge aha for me, because all I said, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So instead of calling it marketing malpractices, I just took the same book proposal and I changed the title to In Search of Marketing Excellence. Right? And I said, okay, we recognize that most companies do it wrong and they spend a lot of money and get very little, and there's all these negative effects. So who are the companies doing it right, and what can we learn from them? Right? So that led us to a bunch of companies, Whole Foods being one of the early ones, which was spending very little money on marketing but had outstanding customer loyalty and trust, which is the opposite of the norm.
Right.
And we started to look at what are they doing, how are they accomplishing this.
Right.
Initially, the scope of our investigation was just looking at their marketing function. And we soon realized they barely have a marketing function. There was no chief marketing officer. There was no ad agency. They spent 90% less than the industry average. And 90% of that was spent at the stores, not at headquarters. And 90% of that was their community outreach activities. That's what they thought of as marketing. And it seemed to be working beautifully, right? Very high customer loyalty and trust. But as we expanded our lens a little bit to understand more deeply, we said, well, it's not just about marketing. Their employees are equally loyal and trusting. There's a very low turnover there. And suppliers, are partners and long-term stable relationships with the company. Their communities They love them, and they're deeply embedded in their communities, etc. So we discovered that there was a stakeholder mindset at these companies, several others as well. And then we looked at, what else could we say about their business? We found that each of them kind of had a missionary zeal. That they were not businesses with a mission, they were missions with a business, in a way. In other words, they were trying to change the world somehow. Whole Foods was trying to change how people thought about food, right? And Jordan's Furniture here was trying to change the way furniture was sold, and CarMax was trying to change the way used cars were sold, and Southwest Airlines was reinventing the aviation business, and so forth, right? So that sense of a higher purpose was also something that we started to see as a pattern. And then beyond that, we saw that the leaders were very different of these companies. They were not your imperial-style CEOs, command and control, top-down, extremely highly paid, operating just by the numbers and so forth. That they came up through the ranks, in many cases were founders. They deeply cared about the purpose. They deeply cared about the people, right? They were not military-style leaders, and they were not mercenary leaders just about money. They were missionary leaders, and people followed them, and they inspired people. And lastly, the culture. So these cultures, we found there was a lot of trust and fun, like Southwest Airlines has a lot of fun, and also caring. And there wasn't the typical fear and stress that you see in companies. So we discovered this pattern. So that book, as you know, became Firms of Endearment. In between, we called it Share of Heart, which refers to the fact that there's a lot of love in these businesses. Mm-hmm. Customers love them, employees love them. But then our editor, publishers, they were pushing back against that title. They thought it was kind of, they said marketing used to be about share of market, then became share of wallet, and now you're talking about share of heart. They thought it was just another cynical, attempt by marketing to try to burrow its way into your. I said, next thing you're going to be saying share of soul or something. So they pushed back. So anyway, we ended up with Firms of Endearment, and then we brought in the lens to just look for companies that were loved. And then we got hundreds of nominations, and we then looked at these dimensions were starting to gel in our minds. So we said, is there a purpose? Is there a stakeholder mindset, etc. And we basically eliminated companies if they fell short on any of those dimensions and any of the stakeholders. So they could be great for 4 or 5 stakeholders, but if they really had a problem with the 6th one, then we said, no, that's not good enough. So by doing that, we ended up with 28 companies out of the hundreds, 18 public and 10 private. And of course, all this time we hadn't done any financial analysis. We simply said, as long as they are going concern, they're not under the threat of bankruptcy, that's okay. So we're not selecting companies on the basis of financial performance here. We're selecting on the basis of doing things that generates this kind of love.
And I have to assume that you and your co-authors in the research, did you decide to dig into the financial performance? And if so, what'd you find?
Yes, after the fact, right? So we had our final list of companies. And then we wrote down our hypotheses. We said, okay, from what we have seen about these companies, they're paying their people well, in some cases very well. So the Container Store pays double the prevailing industry average. Costco pays double of Walmart, 60% higher than Sam's Club. All of them provide much better benefits, healthcare especially. Costco was covering 100% of healthcare at that time. Now it's about 96%. Starbucks was famous for covering even part-time employees. They were investing in their customers and customer care. They were paying their suppliers well. Their suppliers were not being squeezed. Suppliers were profitable. They were investing in their communities. They were investing in their environment. They were paying taxes at a higher rate. We had a chart in the book which showed the marginal tax rate or the effective tax rate paid by these companies. And with the exception of Amazon, which had accumulated losses going back years, so they weren't paying taxes, but everybody else was averaging 34%. At a time when big companies in America were routinely paying 0 or a single digit, right? So these companies were not trying to avoid taxes. So we said, they're spending a lot of money in a lot of things, so maybe investor returns are okay. We still thought they would be good because these are good businesses and they're growing, but they're not trying to maximize shareholder returns. So we said, so even if they perform on par with the market, we were prepared to write that story, that here's a whole bunch of value that's not being captured when we look at companies, purely through the shareholder lens. because their customers are better off, employees, communities are healthier, environment, etc. So we need to capture all of that to show that this is a better way of being in business. What we found, in fact, was that their financial performance was dramatically better than the average as well. So not only were they doing all these other things, they were also outperforming financially. In fact, 9-1 over a 10-year period in that set that we had. Now, we recognize that that wasn't systematically the only such companies, or it wasn't necessarily a fully representative set. We had a somewhat higher representation of retailers. We had a higher representation of consumer businesses rather than industry B2B. But, despite all of that, we said there's still something 9-1 outperformance, right, over a 10-year period. So that really, we had a bunch of awakenings in this research, but that was the biggest and the last one to say, wow, so there's a way of being in business that creates all this other kind of well-being, but also creates more financial wealth as well. And it's not a trade-off, it's not a choice, right, that you pick one path or the other, but you can do both, right? We said there's an expression in business, there's no free lunch, right, which means that everything is a trade-off. And we're discovering that, well, in fact, there is a free lunch, or in a sense that, you have enough for your investors, but you've got enough for everybody else, and you can also, you can have your cake and eat it too, in a way, right? And you can donate some to the local, food shelter, and you can start a cooking school. There's all kinds of things you can do. In other words, businesses create so many different kinds of value, and they can do them all together. So that was a big revelation to us.
And
initially we thought
it sounds like that.
Initially we thought maybe we made a mistake. We analyzed all the data. And then we started to focus on understanding why this might be. And that's kind of been an ongoing journey.
Yeah. So with that question of why might this be, it sounds like this research that you and your co-authors did, in many ways, almost led to the crystallization of the tenets of conscious capitalism. Is that correct? Incorrect?
Yes. So we have them all in the book. We have somewhat different language, but the subtitle is how world-class companies profit from passion and purpose.
Right.
So we talked about purpose there. We had all the stakeholder stuff there. We had. I don't know if you had a separate chapter on leadership in there. We certainly had one on culture. And so I think over time we did, distill, and then by the time we got to the next book, we had those tenets well understood. But we did start to understand that, they're spending more money in various ways by paying people and providing better benefits, and etc. But the big thing is that they're not wasting money on other things, right? So they spend very little on marketing.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest areas of spending.
Yep.
They get the benefit of the best marketing, which is free marketing.
Yep. Word of mouth marketing, loyal customers, people who fall in love with their brands, who are willing to promote them because they believe in what they stand for.
Right. As Kip Tyndall says, the whole universe conspires to assist you when you run a business this way.
Yeah.
Your customers want to have, your employees, everybody's word of mouth.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So it's a lot easier to succeed in business when everybody is conspiring to assist you rather than if they're staying awake at night trying to figure out how to screw you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you
create those conditions.
Yeah, as you think about, perhaps in hindsight, the 28 companies of the 100 that made the final list, and you think about their leadership teams, I'm curious, did you look at, or have you looked at, what the percentage of women leaders on the leadership teams was as compared to perhaps the other 72 or so that didn't make it, or to some of the other consideration sets? Did they have more parity between male, female leaders at the senior leadership table?
We did not look at that at the time, but I've seen research now that I know shows that is the case, that there is evidence that shows that companies that have women in leadership, on the board, etc., not only outperform in the long term financially, but there are a whole bunch of other ways in which they're better. They're more ethical, they're better places to work, they have better impact on the environment and so forth. So that's definitely something that we become more and more conscious of. We started to see the rise of so-called feminine values, not only embodied in having more women, but actually even the men who are leading these companies very much integrate the masculine and feminine dimension. And that has not been true historically. You can go back and find very, very few leaders in government or in business who embodied any of the feminine values. Nurturing, caring, compassion, relationships, all of those kinds of things. I mean, we label them feminine, masculine, they're all human qualities.
Right.
But historically, we have not valued those, and they have not been prominent in leaders. And now we're starting to see that combination is very powerful, mature masculine with mature feminine. And if you had to weight it one side or the other, it's really weighted now more towards the feminine values.
Yeah, and this is some work that you're very focused on right now. Yeah, I know you have a book coming out here within the next month or 6 weeks or so at the most, talking about the embracing of feminine and masculine qualities and power in business. And if hopefully I say it correctly, is it Shakti leadership?
That's right. Shakti leadership should be out sometime in early April. And it is a book that builds on that idea. It's embracing feminine and masculine power. And we put the word feminine first because that's what's been lacking. And that's what's been denigrated and downplayed and suppressed in almost all of human history, and not just in business. Every societal institution has been run by men based on a limited set of masculine values. Domination, aggression, ambition, winning results at all costs, zero-sum thinking, trade-offs, right, win-lose mindset. And so it has caused a lot of suffering. It has caused a lot of pain.
Well, yeah, it seems to be a lot of corruption, a lot of environmental impacts, social breakdown, depression, a lot of what the pharmaceutical companies might refer to as side effects.
Yes, but those side effects can overwhelm.
Absolutely.
We lose what is really valuable in pursuit of that which is fleeting and shallow. And I think that's been human history, right? One war after another. I think England and France alone have fought 600 wars or something in their history. Europe has had 1,200 wars. I mean, it's crazy. Every war, ends and plants the seeds for the next one.
Mm-hmm.
That's been human history.
Yep.
And tremendous untold amounts of suffering and pain have been inflicted by human beings on other human beings. And on, of course, animals and the planet as well. And we think it's time to rise beyond that and finally embrace this whole other dimension of human beings that's just been lying there dormant, Lynn Twist, who we interviewed for the book, had a beautiful way of putting it. She calls this Sophia century. That if you look at the last 3 centuries, the 19th century was about the end of slavery around the world. The 20th century was about the end of totalitarianism in most of the world. And the 21st century will be about the end of this sort of patriarchal domination of the world and suppression of women. That finally women rise to their equal and fair shared position in this world.
Where did the word Shakti come from?
Shakti is an Indian word that refers to, it actually translates literally to power or energy, right? But if you look in the Indian tradition, the spiritual tradition, Shakti is embodied in feminine goddesses. So all of the power of the universe, the creative generative force, see, women are the ones who give birth, right?
Yes.
And so everything that gets created and everything that grows, it really is seen and depicted as sort of this feminine energy of the universe, right? So you have the Shiva, which is representative of the masculine, which is kind of the consciousness, right? But it's kind of still, and it's discernment and focus and all of that. But then you have Shakti, which is kind of the dynamic element, which is what powers everything, right? But the idea is that when you think about power, because we do need power, right? Things don't move without power. But how have we generated power and used power in the past? It has been power over people, right? It has been ego-based power. It has been power it's used to sort of plant your will on other people and make them do things that you want them to do for your purposes. But there's another kind of power that's power with people, where the leader essentially is channeling power, right, that's coming through him or her in order to do the things that are naturally evolving that need to be done. In other words, you're an instrument of what needs to evolve. If you start to think about, the evolution, that evolution has a purpose. Steve McIntosh has a book called Evolution's Purpose, right? That, this world is not just evolving, the universe in a way is not evolving through random mutations, that there is a trajectory to this. And we are evolving towards higher states of being and higher levels of mutuality and embrace and oneness and love and all of those kinds of things. And that's kind of the direction that we are in. And if we can be an agent of that, right? If we are in harmony, if we are going with the grain, if we are going with the current, then we have access to almost infinite power, right? We are simply the agent of harnessing and channeling that, but we don't have to extract it from people. We can actually make them more powerful as we're leading them. Because now we are, having that sense of purpose, for example, gives us all of that power, because now we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and
That's the idea. That's the idea.
And it seems that as we think about capitalism as the greatest system that the human race has ever created to help lift people out of extreme abject poverty. Over the last many years, capitalism has been smeared in the media, in the public eye, is seen as power over people, is seen as the rich continue to get richer at the expense of everybody else moving in the other direction. And is an incredibly misunderstood system. And I'm curious, as you have been beating the drum loudly for conscious capitalism, what do you sense is the future? How are you seeing things? Maybe some recent examples of meetings you've been at. I know you've had some pretty interesting opportunities in D.C. with our labor secretary. You were in New York City not too terribly long ago, meeting with some large company CEOs. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you sensing as the future of capitalism?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting moment we're in. This, on the one hand, rising recognition of the power of this system and what it has done, especially in the last 200 years, that really we've had it. Dramatic changes in material well-being and billions lifted out of extreme abject poverty. So huge impacts in human population, human life expectancy, and literacy, and many other things have risen along with that. At the same time, there's rising consciousness about some of those unintended consequences or side effects or negative things that have happened, because it has come at a price. It has, if you look at public health, if you look at the amount of stress, if you look at what's happened to the environment, if you look at what's happening to species, right? If you look at what's happening to the bees. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that we are doing things in a way that is certainly not sustainable. Because, we've had an extractive mindset, and we have relied upon non-renewable resources, and we have also extracted from human beings, and we've called people human resources, and we have treated them like that. And when you do that, then, like a lump of coal, a resource will burn out. But the fact is, human beings are a source, right? But we have to figure out how to channel that extraordinary power that's in people. It comes through them if they are inspired, if they are in spirit, right? If they are operating with purpose and meaning, and so forth. So I think this mindset shift is about getting away from the extractive mindset and towards this idea of aligning people and connecting them to the higher source and the higher purpose, and then generating the kinds of change that we will need. We cannot deliver prosperity to those who've already become accustomed to it, and to the billions who still don't have it, right? I mean, we talk about the number of people living on less than $1.25 a day is down to about 13-14% from 85-90% that it was historically, and that's great, of course. But the number of people living on less than $3 a day is still about 3 billion, right? And that's almost half the world's population. So by no means can we say mission accomplished and declare victory. There's a lot more to be done. And the fact is that if we simply spread the existing way of doing things, the way that we achieved this prosperity in the West in the last 100 years, If we try to replicate that on a global scale for heading to 9 billion people, we will destroy our planet and destroy each other in the process. So we need to reinvent just about everything. Every major aspect of our lives, whether it's energy or food or transportation or anything, it has to be reinvented. And where is that going to come from? It's going to come from human ingenuity. And when does human ingenuity get engaged? When people are feeling safe, when people feel inspired, right? When people have a sense of shared purpose, etc. So traditional organizations where the vast majority of people are disengaged, where most people, 88%, feel the company doesn't care about them as human beings, where that toxicity is then spreading into their children and families and their communities. Because when you feel a certain way at work, that affects everything. Right? So there's a sense of urgency that unless we change all of that, we are not going to be able to tap into what is our really only hope in this world, which is human ingenuity to help us get the way forward, find new answers to every question. And I think the way that we best do that is by creating these kinds of conscious organizations that do, in fact, provide the conditions under which human beings can flourish and reveal the extraordinary gifts that they are carrying with them. It's like the energy inside an atom was locked away for all of history, right? Until just a few decades ago, and we discovered a way to extract or release that energy. And it literally blew us away. And that's inside human beings. Far more, in fact. Think about how much there is. Human beings have almost divine capacities. But most of us die with our music still inside us. It never, ever gets released. And the fact is that human beings are becoming more capable and more intelligent over time. But our organizations are suppressing them.
Well, and what resonates for me, a quote that you shared, and I believe it was in the Firms of Endearment book, from Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, that refers to, and if I butcher it, I apologize, something to the effect of, it's a wonderful time to be alive when almost everything you thought you knew was wrong. And when students are graduating from business school today and joining the business communities, and leaders who have been in the business world for a number of years have finally risen to the top and are operating under a mental model of command and control and hierarchical and militaristic and power and trade-offs and zero sum. This is the set of received wisdom that obviously got us to where we're at, but it's not going to be the wisdom that's going to carry us to where we need to go.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why we have to reinvent everything. And, we can't do that under our existing system. Because right now we're just educating people essentially to implement what's already there.
Yeah.
To a large extent.
Yeah.
But, we have all the pieces that we need. As I said, we've got 7 billion people in the world, 7.3. And if you look at the IQ, if you just look at IQ data, right, the average person today would have been in the top 2% of IQ in 1935.
Wow.
They would have been considered a near genius.
Yeah.
Right? That's the average person today.
Wow.
So how many geniuses do we have in the world today compared to what we had 100 years ago?
Yeah.
But a genius, it doesn't matter if you don't have the education, if you don't have the the organizational context, if you don't have the capital, you don't have the tools, you don't have the team. So all of the pieces are there, but, we have to be the designers of the system so that we can then deploy that towards our shared well-being. And I think that's the great opportunity that we have right now.
Well, I think that is a wonderful place to leave on a very optimistic high note. Raj, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I know our listeners are going to find tremendous value in your story and the work that you are currently pursuing. Again, I do want to mention the book that's coming out here, Shakti Leadership, with your co-author, Nilma Bhatt, here you said the beginning of April. Is that correct?
Yes, the official publication date is May something, but the book will be available, I think, as of April 4th or 5th.
Excellent. Well, Raj, I cannot thank you enough again for spending the time with us. Wish you the absolute best as you continue your purpose and just really want to thank you. So have a wonderful, wonderful year, and we look forward to hopefully chatting with you sometime soon.
Thank you, Brian. I enjoyed it a great deal. Thank you.
Wonderful. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening, folks. You can obtain a transcribed version of this show and hear more interviews from the Built on Purpose podcast on our website, yscouts.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I have 2 additional things for you. One, I'm hoping to get some bonus questions answered by Raj from our community. So if you have any questions you'd like Raj to answer, please drop me a line at brian@yscouts.com with your question, and I'll certainly forward it on. Second thing, if you enjoyed this episode, there's a couple of others I think you'll love as well. Patty McCord, former Netflix Chief Talent Officer and the current principal at Patty McCord Consulting, talks to us about how we can be innovative when it comes to our work. And Michelle Gielen, founder of the Institute for Applied Positive Research and the author of Broadcasting Happiness, The Science of Igniting and Sustaining Positive Change, talks to us about the power of how we broadcast our messages. Once again, that URL is yscouts.com/podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.